Good morning, everyone. Hello, and welcome to our session today, Famous Faces in New Spaces. From Rio Ferdinand to Miriam Margolyes, some of the most entertaining and thought-provoking programmes on our screens in recent years have featured well-known faces moving into factual television from very different backgrounds. Each comes with a reputation at stake and a public image to be unpacked by filmmakers. In this session, we're going to explore this trend from those both behind and in front of the camera. What does it feel like for established faces to make the move into factual TV? And how can producers and directors work with them to create successful programmes once they've taken the leap? From the genesis of an idea, through the production process and to the edit, if we don't run out of time first, we're going to draw on the experiences of our panel and try to unlock some of the tricks of the trade and the potential pitfalls of these kinds of projects. So first, a whistle-stop tour through our panel today. For those who don't know me, I'm Clare Mottershead. I'm a commissioner in the Popular Factual and Factual Entertainment team at the BBC. Ed Balls, to my left, as we all know, is the former Labour Shadow Chancellor who, after losing his seat in 2015, sorry to bring that up, Ed, decided to ignore the well-trodden path to well-paid consultancy jobs in favour of sequins and spray tans on Strictly. After winning the hearts of the nation with his unforgettable performance of Gangnam Style, sorry to bring that up again, Ed, last year, Ed made the move into factual television, travelling to America's deep south for BBC Two's Travels in Trumpland. A follow-up series is being cut at the moment, and we'll follow Ed as he journeys around Europe to explore the rise of populism. And if that wasn't a big enough challenge, this year he also tackled Mount Kilimanjaro as part of a cast of celebrities doing the bigger red nose climb for this year's Comic Relief. Welcome, Ed. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks for that. A little ripple.
I'm measuring.
Okay.
Next to Ed is Emily Hudd, who's joint MD at Rumpus Media, the indie she set up with Ian Wimbush in 2013. Specialising in comedy and factual entertainment, they have successfully launched the TV careers of a host of top comedy talent. Recent productions include Joe Lycett's Got Your Back, the second series of Joel and Nish versus the World, and what I can only describe as truly unique to anyone who hasn't seen it before, Blind Boy Undestroys the World. Emily is perhaps best known for helping to launch the career of Ramesh Ranganathan with Asian Provocateur on BBC Three. More recently, she has brought Ramesh's singular take on travelogue to the BBC Two with the popular Misadventure series. And I think you're cutting a second series of that right now as well, are you not?
We are.
And we're going to get a little sneak preview of that later on. Emily, thank you for joining us. You're winning so far. Next to Emily, former head of Vice's digital programming in the UK, Wendie Ottewill has over a decade of experience as an acclaimed documentary maker, with series which span the globe from Welcome to Rio, Reggie Yates' Extreme Russia, and Living with the Amish. Throughout her career, Wendie has worked with top talent from Stacey Dooley and Susanna Reid, as well as some footballer you probably won't have heard of, David something. Beckham, I think you said?
Yes.
Most recently, she directed Another David with David Herold in Psychosis and Me, which offered an intimate exploration of the actor's personal battle with mental health. And it's actually Wendie's birthday today, so she's doubly kind to have given her time to the panel. Thanks, Wendie.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
And then last, but certainly not least, Sheffield University alumnus and local resident, Dan Walker, is a familiar fixture on a BBC sofa, presenting Football Focus, BBC Breakfast, Final Score and Match of the Day. He began his TV and radio journalism before moving into TV. Dan has covered many of the BBC's major sporting events and recently made the move into factual television, deciding to start easy by joining Ed on the climb to Kilimanjaro, as well as sharing a locker room with the Duke of Cambridge, along with football legends like Peter Crouch and Gareth Southgate to discuss men's mental health for the film A Royal Team Talk. Dan, thank you for dashing from the breakfast studios
Thank
today.
you very much.
Right, intro's done. Let's start at the very beginning, as Julie Andrews once sang, I believe it, by talking about how these kind of ideas get off the ground. How these kind of ideas get off the ground. Ed, I'm going to start with you. You'd already made the leap from the House of Commons to Broadcasting House via Strictly. Why did you go from there to make Travels in Trumpland, and what was it about that particular project that attracted you?
It was a really long journey, actually. It took ages. We, during Strictly, about 3/4 of the way through, I started to get lots of emails coming in. I had no agent at the time, not a TV agent. And then I saw Charlotte Moore, who said that they would like to do something and we should start a conversation, but it shouldn't really be about politics. And then for about 4, 5, 6 months, whole series of I mean, it's actually really interesting. When I look back, there were 5 different things people wanted. They were on a journey, midlife crisis, have a go, what's happening to the world, and through the medium of dance. And normally, every idea, the ones which weren't clearly written for Michael Portello and he'd rejected them, like travelling round on a boat at the ports of Britain, that kind of thing, were all different versions of this. And I apologise if anybody in the room wrote any of these. One of my favourite ones was 20 years on from the anniversary, the 20-year anniversary of independence for Hong Kong. Ed Balls travels out to the former British province and travelling through in workplaces, schools, clubs and community centres, he dances with local Hong Kong residents and through that discovers what their sense of identity is in the Hong Kong of the new China.
I think I want to watch
And I just imagine me sort of, dancing, talking about Beijing. Or Refugee Camp the Musical was also a cracker, but let's not go into that. And then finally out of that, actually in a conversation with the commissioners and then with Expectation, surprisingly to me, actually, the BBC went back to politics, but not UK politics, and they wanted it to be fact-ent, which was a word at the time. I had no idea what the word was, factual entertainment. I'm not sure I still do, but I know it's different from specialist factual, but I'm not sure what that is either. And it's different from entertainment. I was told it was important that it should be invitational, but not too invitational. It needed to be bright.
Yeah.
What does that mean? Anyway, and it would be going and being immersive, but understanding
you did get
American
immersed,
politics.
that's for
and
sure.
but it took a long time to get there.
Yeah, great, thank you. And Emily, how about Ramesh's series? How did the genesis of that project come about, and what made you think Ramesh would be a good fit in kind of factual space?
So we'd already made 2 series of Agent Provocateur for BBC Three, and that was just a joy because we didn't know when we started that Ramesh had the range that he does, because he's obviously very funny, and we'd managed to find something that was all about him and his personal story and felt authentic, and we went out and shot that, and we realised that he was able to go from light to dark really quickly and deftly, and 1 minute be talking about the loss of his father and the next minute be talking about something completely puerile and stupid. So we knew that he had that range, and we were thinking about, well, where do we go from here? What's his sort of graduation project? And then we started talking to David Brindley about it, and our original idea was more comedic than it ended up being, but I think if it had originally been quite serious, we never would have got him to do it.
Yeah.
Because I think he was quite nervous about it. So sort of slowly, we moved over into a more factual space. And then, thought about still we need to play to his strengths, so what's he really good at? Well, he's our take on the world. He's every man, but funnier. And so he can go into these places with not a huge amount of knowledge, viewing them through this prism, which is, what do I know about Zimbabwe? What do I know about Colombia? What I've seen on the news, what I've read in the papers, and that's okay. So we just felt like he could bring something quite different and unique, and we didn't have to repurpose him as an expert in order for him to do it.
Great, and I think we've got a clip actually to show of the new series. This is a preview from Series 2. Ramesh is in Zimbabwe, and he's with his guide Cheapo, and they're meeting a cheetah, as you do. And hopefully it kind of explains kind of what he brings to this space.
Oh, it's brilliant. Well done, that's really good.
So, Emily, was the addition of a kind of friend or colleague or fixer with Ramesh, was that part of him agreeing to do it and part of the kind of shape of it?
That was a late addition. I think that actually was Patrick Holland's idea. Because originally he was going to have the same person travel with him to each place. But that really lifts it, because actually you just get this unique local perspective on each place, and his different relationships with all of them are completely unique, and they all WhatsApp him still quite a lot and send him weird pictures. But that's really nice, because sometimes he's got on with them, sometimes there have been debates, sometimes it hasn't gone so well, but all of those things are completely real, all those relationships that happen on and off camera when we're not filming.
Fantastic. Dan, in your day job as a presenter, you often have quite a defined role. What made you plunge into the unknown territory of Kilimanjaro?
I think it was a huge BBC fee. No, it wasn't. No, we weren't paid to go to Kilimanjaro, of course. I think it was. Sorry, you see Ed recoiling there. It was just the opportunity, really. As somebody who, for many years, has made like shorter documentaries or programs for either BBC World or radio shows, the opportunity to do something like that for something which I'd watched for many, many years and thought I'd love to be involved in that in some way, and then to get told initially, look, there's a very long list, would you like to be on it? And I obviously said yes, and then I suppose as if you're brutal, as many people pulled out, I became an obvious candidate. But then to team up with the likes of Ed and Shirley and two lasses from Little Mix and OC and Anita and Alexandra Armstrong, it was just, and Danny Dyer. It was. I mean, Ed giggles because
the Danny Dyer, not the old guy.
Yeah, not the guy from
Danny Dyer from Love Island, as my teenage daughter said.
It was just it was a brilliant opportunity to be involved in, and I think probably Ed would agree. We didn't really have an idea of what it would be like until we got there, and then it just became something I think a little bit different, not only for us but for the production team as well. And it moved from being a program which I suppose they felt might involve quite a few diva strops and showbiz fallouts to something which became a little bit more emotional than anybody thought it would be, but also a bit more motivational as well, in terms of 9 very different people, huge age range, trying to get to the top of this massive mountain together for charity. And I think that the way that we saw that story develop over the 10 days or so, and the way that Shine saw that change as well, was really interesting to see from the outside and being part of it as well.
Thank you. And you talk about kind of not knowing quite what to expect when you go in. I mean, once an idea is green-lit and it's up and running and it all gets real, I'm interested to find out about kind of what preconceptions everyone has starting out on the process. Wendie, how do you approach working with a big-name talent like David Herold or David Beckham? Do you have preconceptions going in?
I think of them the same way I think of all contributors, actually. It's about gaining their trust. Someone like David Beckham, I think I met him once before the shoot, and David Harewood I actually didn't meet at all before the shoot. I literally started filming the first day I met him. In terms of their preconceptions, I think that they're a celebrity, they've got people around them that sort of protect them a bit, and you just got to kind of try and just get through that as quickly as possible, gain their trust. But really, they are humans. I mean, it sounds obvious, and you want to sort of treat them as humans. A lot of people fawn around them, and you need to get that balance right of not fawning completely, showing them respect. But really, just I literally think of it as like a normal contributor.
And is there a kind of, on the kind of first day that you meet them and start filming, is there something that you do? Do you have a kind of chat with them to tell them what's going to happen? Or?
With David Harewood, he was filming in Canada, so we had literally 2 emails to exchanges where I explained the sort of the form of the documentary, how I wanted him to record his phone calls, and we just talked a bit about the form, and I explained to him that I wanted to turn up with the camera, and was he okay with that? Because I didn't want to meet him and talk to him, and he could tell, if he started telling me off camera, about why he was doing it, I'd have to get him to do it again later. So I just said, right from the beginning, can we just turn up with a camera? And so it's in the pre-title sequence, but the first thing we filmed, which was him in his kitchen, I just said, look, the camera's here, we're just going to just chat to you. I chatted to him about where I was from. We're both from the Midlands, that bonded us. Talked a bit about Canada, and then just said, so tell me about the tweets. And, it was just very conversational. So I think for him, the hardest thing was looking at me and not the camera. I think that was the main thing to get. He was used to sort of looking down a lens, so he found the intimacy of looking at me the hardest thing. But I guess we call him fluffing them. It's just basically having a chat first before you get to those questions. Yeah. So they've warmed up a bit.
Creating a kind of human rapport, ultimately.
Absolutely, yeah.
And how about you, Ed? When you kind of finally said, yes, I'm going to go and do this, how much preparation did you do? How much did you know about documentary making?
Oh, I didn't know anything about documentary making, and I think that one of the challenges for the first series was about what the method should be, and the method basically changed between EP 1 and EP 2 and EP 3, because I think there's a prior point first, that most people live their lives in real time. I mean, they actually live live, And if you are a politician, you do all of your media live, if you possibly can, because to put yourself as a politician into an edited format is quite risky.
Right.
Because who knows what they're doing. So to step as a contributor or somebody who's not from this world into a world where it's all going to be filmed for very many hours and then edited is a very unnatural, it's a very risky thing to do. It's quite a worrying thing to do, because for people in this world, it's what you do all the time. But for most people, they don't live like that. They live in real time. So the trust thing is really important. And it's not simply about people being nice to you. It's whether fundamentally, do you trust that their motive and their aim and their goal aligns with what you want, and it's going to be genuinely interactive, and in the end, we're all on the same side, which, as I say, as a politician, is not how you feel most of the time. Yeah. And for this to work, you actually have to feel that trust, and that is something which takes, I think, a long time to build. And if you've never done it before, you have no idea. The complication for me was that the method which we started out with was it all has to be a genuine discovery, and therefore you shouldn't know what's going to happen until it happens. And the trouble with that is kind of conflicts with trust building, and especially for somebody like me who's just not used to that. And I think what evolved over the I think fundamentally I trusted the edit because I liked the people, and my agent said, it's okay, you can trust them. And I think fundamentally the most important thing your agent does is tell you it's okay. Because if they said, well, I'm not sure you should do this because I'm not sure what the motive is, then you'd run a mile. But I think what happened was that we realized that I wasn't going to fully trust the situation if I didn't know about it. And therefore, progressively, I became much, much more part of the prior conversation. And there might be things I would discover, but within the context of knowledge.
Kind of framework.
And I would go into a scene knowing what our goal was, what we were trying to achieve, what the point was, although it was never scripted, and therefore what I said was up to me in the beginning, the middle, and the end. If I knew what they wanted, I could relax about getting there. Whereas if it was all a mystery, the truth was, for me, I held back. And I think from a documentary people point of view, they all thought, well, if he doesn't know, it will be natural. And the truth was, in an edited world, it doesn't become natural, it becomes unnatural because I was cautious, whereas the more I was able to trust, and that was actually about purpose. It was knowing, it became clear after the first episode that I just had to know the arc of the episode, what we're trying to achieve, what each scene was going to be about. Where there were going to be surprises, they could be twists, but not fundamental surprises. And but I think the thing you said about the trust building, I think it takes a long time, especially if you're new to the world.
Yeah, we didn't have that long. We filmed over sort of 3 weeks, 4 weeks in total. But I think it's about being upfront about that. And I did talk to him about it. I did this sort of talk of doom, I call it, which is basically there are things that you don't know. There are times we're going to fall out. There's times you're going to get irritated with me. But just trust me, let's film everything. We can always not use it. We can always not use it in the edit. But if we don't have it, we can't go back and replicate it.
I think the thing, though, which is the hard thing, though, is that there's this word talent, which I also learned. I thought talent was about people being talented, but I realised talent is a box which people are put in, which is where they're got out, and they can be talent from it, and they're put back in again. And so therefore, and certainly in Strictly, talent meant there were things you didn't see and places you didn't go, but you had a runner and they bought you a coffee, but fundamentally you're talent, so you were over here. And so the question of the edit, is the talent involved in the edit? When you say, it will all be okay because we can decide later, well, whose decision is that? And how cooperative is that going to be? And there's a challenge, because as a filmmaker, you want to make your film, but building trust with somebody who doesn't know about that world and saying, well, we can sort that out later, well, you start thinking, well, who's sorting it out? How's it going to be sorted out?
But they're always going to see the film, and I think I would never want to put something out that someone was really unhappy with. And I
so
think
if
by
they didn't like something?
I haven't had that, because I think by the time you get to the edit, you sort of know what the stories are, and you've talked it through. So I sort of knew what David wouldn't want in the film, and it wasn't like I didn't put things in because he wouldn't want it in. It just wasn't relevant, and there was enough relevant stuff to make a film that he could be proud of. And also, it was a deeply personal film for him. He was putting himself on the line, so why would I betray that trust?
With regards to that, then, would you and David have become friends during that process?
Yeah.
So then,
Yeah.
Were you also trying to protect him at the same time as making the best film possible?
Friends, colleagues, more so, yeah. I don't know if I was trying to protect him. I suppose I have, nothing was more important than his mental health. And I said that to him all the time. We're making a film here, but your mental health is more important than anything. And I truly believed that, and I think he believed me. Was I trying to protect? I don't know if I was
In the end, it goes to, do you feel as though you're all part of the same team who mutually are trying to achieve the same output? And you can think of lots of programs where it wouldn't be the case, and therefore you should run a mile from them.
Yeah, I think at times he didn't. I think in the thick of it, he'll admit, we weren't always on the same page. But by the end, because as you say, he's new to it. He's an actor, doesn't know why we're doing some things and why it's relevant to meet that person, or why I'm asking these questions in this way. But by the end of it, he was happy. And again, it's just about kind of constantly, talking. It's about communication.
We've actually got a clip from your film Wendie with David, which is perfectly segued into there, thank you, which was shot really early on, I believe, in the process. And it's a visit he makes to a hospital with the two friends who found him 20 years ago, and he was at the height of his kind of psychotic crisis. I'm going to show it, and then it'd be good to talk about, getting to such a kind of raw and intimate space so quickly. Let's have a look at that. Pretty powerful stuff for kind of the second day of filming.
Yeah.
Did kind of, we talked about trust before, taking him into that space so early on, did that kind of impact the film you did from that point, or?
It did. I mean, before that, the day before that, or 2 days before that, I'd done a master interview, about a 4-hour master interview with him. And I just think during that master interview, we'd become close. He'd talk. It was a bit like therapy, he kept saying, it's like a therapy session. So we became close. So I knew a lot about him. In terms of that, I mean, David is a really brave person as well. He was he felt strongly about telling his story. It happening so early in the film was good and bad. It was good because we then knew what happened to him. The friends had told me, so David had always told the story as a bit of a pump anecdote, heard voices and it was funny, and Martin Luther King had told me to go, told me to do this thing in Camden. And then, so I knew that it would be quite powerful when we got to the hospital and he would actually hear the reality of what happened to him. So after that, everything was shaped by that. It meant that every filming day after that was tough, to be honest. He struggled every day, and every day we'd start the day with, we don't have to film today. We don't have to. Again, nothing's more important than your mental health, but if you want to, you can. We had this sort of very small team. It was just myself, a producer, and a camera person. And we were able to sort of stand down and do GVs and other things if he wasn't ready. Yeah. But I think, and again, that was, I think, one of the times when I did say, let's just film, and let's talk about it afterwards. And we went to the pub afterwards and talked it through. And we said, let's, that was big for you. Let's keep talking about that. But when he watched it back, he was like, wow, it's powerful stuff. And I know it needed to be. He knew that it needed to be shown. Yeah,
fascinating. Mm-hmm. Dan, you're helpful on this panel because you're both kind of poacher and gatekeeper in this space. Excuse me. You were recently in a position when you were making a Royal Team talk about having to strip away the celebrity from famous people and get them to talk very kind of openly and honestly about personal things. We're going to show a clip from the programme first, and then we'll talk about kind of how you managed to achieve that. This is Dan speaking to Gareth Southgate about his experiences following the kind of infamous penalty miss at the World Cup. Obviously, that's, people talking about their most intimate moments of their kind of careers very quickly. I mean, you didn't have a long time with, lots of the people there. They're all very busy with not as much time to spare. How do you shortcut that process and really get people talking that quickly?
It was quite a complicated thing, really, because anybody who works in telly will know there's probably about 25 people sat and stood just the other side of a series of cameras, all looking in, and various representatives of the different groups there. Ever since I knew I was doing that, I'd really tried to plan things very carefully in my head. Knew the people who were taking part just a few days beforehand. So I had a really clear idea of what I wanted to get from each one of those people. I had conversations with David, Brynley and Alison Kirkham and the editor and the director there on the day. And it came down practically to actually, one of the first things I did when I got there is I went in and had a look at the interview space. And I said, right, do you mind if I choose where people go? So I made sure that I had direct eye contact with Gareth Southgate, who was sat directly opposite me, Jermaine, who was sat in the corner next to the Duke of Cambridge, and Peter Crouch, because those were the three people that I knew best out of those three. I'd met everybody before, but I didn't really have a sort of professional and personal relationship with them. And then when they all arrived, I made sure that I grabbed those three and had 5 to 10 minutes with them on my own. And I just sort of said, listen, I know that you're brilliant in this space, but I don't want it to be an interview. It needs to be a conversation, and I don't really want to be in it. So I've heard Gareth Southgate talk about racism in football. I've heard Danny Rose talk about being the victim in terms of racism in football, but I've never heard you have a conversation yourselves, and neither is anybody else who's watching this. So you talk to each other. If Danny's talking in depth about something you know about, rather than me going, and Gareth, what do you think? I need you to look at me all the time, so I'll give you the eyes, and then you have that conversation. So I talked to Gareth about that. I said the same thing to Jermaine, and the same thing to Peter. So essentially I had 3 extra people doing my job in that room. And I can't remember exactly the sequence of the edit. If you watch the whole thing raw, I think after about 10 minutes, people start looking at me less. And then by sort of half an hour in, and the final half hour of that raw, they're all just talking amongst themselves, and they've almost forgotten that there's 25 people watching. And they're just chatting like 6 incredibly famous blokes about stuff. And all of them said afterwards, they've all talked about things that they'd never mentioned before. And that's my little 3 goals. As I walked in there, I said a little private word with myself. I always go to the toilet before I do something like that. And I don't actually go to the toilet, but I go in the toilet.
To gather.
Exactly, a little secret place. Go in the cubicle. I just think, right, what are the 3 things you want to get out of this? And my first thing was that the less you're in it, the better. The second thing was I want them all to feel comfortable in that space. And the third thing was I wanted them all to give something of themselves, but not so much that they felt that they put themselves out there and it was dangerous, but so that they felt that they'd shared something, so they were part of that experience.
Yeah.
And I think over the course of that hour, all of them were quite relieved at the end of it that they had taken part, and then they'd been able to share in that experience of talking about things that, on the back of that, I've spoken to all of them, apart obviously the Duke of Cambridge. I haven't got him on speed dial. I've spoken to all of them after that, and every single one of them has said the reaction has been incredible. And they've had conversations with people who they knew, but didn't know that they had some sort of mental health issue.
Yeah.
Or people have just come up to them and said, that really helped me with this. So I think the last thing I did, again, I mentioned to David beforehand, and David said, I think that'd be a really good idea, is just before we sat down, I just gave him a little pep talk, really, and I said, listen, if you're willing to be open and honest, it will make a massive difference to everybody watching this. And they actually left that in the film in the end, bizarrely, in the preamble. But they were all great. And I suppose as an interviewer in that situation, on the other side, as you were saying, what really helped to make that a brilliant bit of telly was them.
Yeah.
Because they were all willing and able to deliver on those really serious topics, but also sprinkle a bit of humour in there as well. And I think that's why it's had such a big impact.
Yeah, well, it certainly has. And I think, as you said, it's about kind of almost creating a space in which all the other people in the room fade away and it becomes a conversation. I know you talked about that, Wendie, in terms of, talking to David and things kind of slipping in and out of kind of what's for the show and just what's a conversation.
Absolutely, especially someone like David, who is a performer, who's used to kind of looking down, he'd presented a documentary a couple before, and it had been very presentery, and sort of they had turned the camera on, but I wanted this to feel different. So we'd have the camera on and just be chatting away, and then just throwing questions, and it was very conversational.
Fantastic. And I mean, you touched on this a bit, Dan, in terms of kind of getting to the real person. And we often talk about that in factual television. You must get to the real person behind them. But, these are people often, who come in with established persona, so there is already a kind of a them out there in the world, so it's probably quite a vulnerable thing to do. Emily, Ramesh's experience with his panel shows and kind of comedy performances where he was very much kind of on, what were the challenges of taking him into a different kind of space where he didn't have to be funny all the time?
Yeah, I think the scariest thing for a comedian in the factual space is to be serious and to not undercut what you're saying, because that's the rhythm of comedy. You know, you'll say something and it seems really heartfelt, and then you'll undercut it with a gag. And you're always thinking, when's the next joke coming? How long is the gap between the gags? And if there's suddenly a serious scene, that's really exposing for them, because they've also got a big brand, and their brand is comedy, and their brand is being funny. And I think that's really scary, and it takes a certain amount of bravery to get in that space and do that. And I think for Ramesh, he was always, you know, it's interesting what you were saying about collaboration, that sort of, you know, when you're on a trip together and you're all away for quite a long time, the lines sort of blur a little bit, and I think you are collaborative, and we'd always sort of say to him, look, going into a particular scene, there's nothing funny about genocide, right? So let's have this conversation and just tell us exactly what you feel and how you react to it. And then in the edit, he would always come into the edit and we'd have conversations and we'd have debates about things, and sometimes we would agree, sometimes we'd disagree, sometimes BBC would get involved as well and we'd see where things were going and how they felt. But I think that is the joy of it, is the breadth that you can have when you bring people that aren't factual experts into this space, is that you get real highs, but also a completely new perspective on someone you thought you knew.
Sure, and I mean, everybody's talking about the massive importance of just clear communication, and it sounds like such a simple thing to say, but it's true, isn't it? It's taking somebody with you on that journey throughout and letting them know your intention as well, so there isn't any kind of grey area there. Another thing about kind of like showing yourself and being the real person is, you know, quite often it's a slight trope of factual television that we see people break down, and breaking them down reveals that inner self. Dan, we're going to show a clip of your struggle on Killy, sorry.
I have no memory of this.
Where you were probably at your most exposed. And then it'd be good to discuss what that kind of experience of breaking down was like for you. The end, was it, Dan?
Thankfully it wasn't the end, no. Came out the other side. It is weird because watching that back at the time, I can't really remember any of that other than the conversation with Jade at the end. And that's, I suppose that's a sign of what anyone who's not been at altitude, and none of us had ever been anywhere near that sort of altitude before. I think Snowdon is probably the most any of us had done. So when you're at 4,500 metres, I think as we were that day, it just hit me like a ton of bricks, really. And I remember when my agent's in the room now, because every opportunity, I try and get him to come north. He lives in London, so he considers north to be, you know, Watford. So he's here in Sheffield today. But I remember speaking to him after the documentary went out, once we came back, and he was quite concerned that whether I had cried or not. But I just think that's, for me now, watching that back, I have no problem with that whatsoever, because that's what it was like.
Yeah. And
I think anybody who's been at severe altitude knows that you can. That's how it affects you. I mean, and Ed was on the final night of the climb. Ed's body shut down, and it shows you how brutal it can be. And I watch that now back thinking, I'm glad that everybody who thinks that Kilimanjaro is just a climb in the Peak District can watch that and see how hard it was. And it was. I think it was much harder than any of us. Not that we weren't prepared for it, but it was much harder than any of us thought it would be, both mentally and physically. And I think that's actually good for people to see how difficult that was. Because when we come back now and we raise 2.7 million quid or whatever it is, we look back at that and I think actually it was a struggle. It was difficult, but it was something that we went through. And I genuinely don't think that any of us would have got through it had it not been for the other 8 that we were climbing with. And all throughout that, the documentary team were part of that as well. I think that's really important to remember, that we were having conversations, obviously not on camera, but we were having conversations with them, and they were having conversations with us, and we were having conversations amongst ourselves, some of it filmed, some of it not filmed. And we were aware that we had to really, if we were going to do this, we had to really dig in, not just from our perspective in terms of the people at that side of the camera, but also for them. They're lugging ridiculously heavy equipment up a mountain while taking altitude drugs at the same time as well. So I think that's why once we finished and we got back to sea level, there was such a relief from everybody that we've completed this. No one's in serious health trouble. And now we've got the second part of this process, really, of trying to make a decent documentary for Comic Relief.
That's great. And were you nervous before you saw it? Did you kind of think, oh God, they're definitely going to show that bit of me crying?
No, because I knew Ed had spent most of the time there just falling over, so I knew that.
Also made the final cut.
So I knew there was going to be a lot of interest in that anyway, so it was fine.
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because that's a kind of very extreme physical kind of journey that, anybody would kind of, struggle with. I wonder whether there are other kinds of ways in which, you're meant to, you're kind of, as someone in front of the camera, you're asked to go into places and spaces and kind of emotions that, that feel uncomfortable, and whether, Ed, do you ever feel that you're kind of manipulated to break down, to feel, to kind of bare your soul?
No, I've never felt like that, because I think all the stuff I've done has always felt like we were taking all the time we needed. It was a complete team. We knew that we were going to be together till the end, and I think that the people like me, knowing you're going to be there with the team all through the edit to the end, and then when things happen, because he's filming so many hours, the cameras are just on. The point about there, Dan wasn't thinking about the cameras. I mean, we have been filmed for so many hours. Actually, that reason why that moment was so important, I remember it really well, was because if Dan had gone at that point, I think others would have done. Actually, that was a moment where the film changed from, would these guys get on, to, oh my God, this is a team.
Yeah.
And we were told all the way through, it's impossible for all 9 of you to get there together. People will drop out, you'll break apart. And because we got through that phase with Dan, at that point, everybody totally stuck together. But I guess in the first season of Trumpland, I do interview with a mum and her daughter who was part of the Parkland shooting.
Yeah.
And we've done 3 hours of filming, and it was kind of intense and emotional. And then when we came out, and the director said, "What was that like?" And I was about to say, that was quite hard, and I completely lose it at that point, just because I think all the pressure and the intensity of it suddenly just welled out.
Yeah.
I don't think I ever thought at that point that this is a problem, that I'm going to be manipulated. I think it was very important that it was, as it is in the film, it was seen totally genuinely. I'm sort of walking out, and I'm as shocked as everybody else is, but my reaction.
Yeah.
But in the end, my sense is that the viewer spots a manipulation really quickly, and anything which is fake, people see.
Yeah.
And whereas if it's real, then it's just part of the film. And as long as you trust the film and the edit and the team, it's just part of what it is.
I think that's really important, because I think as a viewer of these things as well, I think you can see through. You can see the fakery quite early on. I could go back to something in Kilimanjaro as well, when it was Ed's birthday, and I think the guys who were cooking us food sort of brought in this lovely cake, and Ed made this speech, and Ed got quite emotional making the speech, and Xander Armstrong, who at that point essentially cried at anything. He
was in bits.
He was crying. Anita was crying.
We all cried.
But also the crew that were filming it, I remember looking at Charlie, and she was getting quite emotional filming this. So it wasn't a case. It never ever felt like them and us. It felt like we've got to get through this together. And I remember making a very different. I made a documentary for BBC World years ago where I went to Auschwitz with Avram Grant, who about 6 months before that had been the Chelsea manager, nearly won the Champions League final. So we came up with this idea, because he had Polish family, we'd take him back to Poland, we'd travel through Poland, and we'd try and find the story about 15 members of his family who lived in Poland, had been taken to Auschwitz and gassed. And we sort of followed his trip around Poland with him, and eventually we're in Auschwitz. And this guy, who is, in a world of football, is incredibly famous and could have been a manager who won the biggest club competition there is in the world. And he's standing at the steps of the gas chamber 1, and he's crying uncontrollably about the fact that his family had arrived sort of 25 yards away, and Dr. Mengele had been there, given some of them the thumbs up, some of them the thumbs down, and his family members had just literally walked over there, down the steps, and been gassed in the chamber. And in my head, you're like, how do I'm meant to be interviewing him and chatting to him, and I remember I just thought, this is so emotional, I can't be in this. So I sort of took 5 steps back and just allowed him to rant and rage at at the world. And then the guide who we were with said, I'll never forget this. The guide who was there said, Mr. Grant, I've got to tell you, because Avram was saying these people are animals, they're disgusting, they're rats, how could they let this happen? He said, you cannot feel like that. He said, because if you start to think that they are different to you and to I, if you start to think that they are evil and over there, then that's when it can happen again. Because we're one generation from this happening again. Mm-hmm. And that, in all the stuff that I've done over the years, that's still the most powerful and raw bit of telly I'd ever seen. And to go back to what you were saying before about whether it felt natural or normal, it did. It felt totally natural. Even though it was such a highly strung, emotional moment, it felt totally natural and normal. And just a normal conversation that two people were having, even though there were cameras all over the place. It never felt manipulated, I don't think.
Well, it's interesting that you kind of stepped out of it, actually, and took the element of manipulation, the kind of overt element, away entirely. Mm. I want to talk a bit about kind of boundaries. Obviously, we talked about kind of trust earlier, and, you know, people giving of themselves and showing their real self. And I want to kind of find out what happens when, you know, you come up against, maybe production or director comes up against something that the talent, to use a word I know you don't like, is uncomfortable with. You know, how do you go about negotiating those boundaries? And I want to kick off this with a clip from Travels in Trumpland. And for those who haven't seen it, it took an immersive journey through the Deep South. And in this clip, you're about as immersed as it's possible to be, I think, preparing to take part in a wrestling match, to understand the kind of with us and against us rhetoric that Trump employed so successfully. Thanks for that moment. If it actually mentions lines you should not cross, you know, how conscious of you were you of your reputation going into this series, and were there lines that you thought I'm not going to cross? I mean, not many, obviously.
Clearly not conscious at all on the basis of that. No, well, in that particular case, I insisted on wearing boxers because I thought the bikini line was just too much. And the producers said it would ruin the effect of the leotard. And I said, I'm really sorry. I'm going to wear boxers. So I think the conversation we had there is actually true. And if you come out, I think in politics, I was somebody who was kind of willing to take risks, but you know that there is a line. And it's very hard to define. And actually, it's as much physical and instinctive, the point where you sort of recoil. And I think what we learned in making both series of this show is that in the end, the production team, they trust that I'm willing to go quite a long way. I mean, I was tasered, but that when I say that is just too far, then actually that's respected. So I won't humanise people who are overt, active politicians from the far right. I don't mind doing something immersive and human with a voter, but if it's somebody who's actually elected on a far-right ticket, that for me is just a bit too far. We had one in the first season of Trumpland where as part of preparing to go to Mar-a-Lago and to be in character so that I would feel like all the Trump supporters at Mar-a-Lago, I'm at a clinic in Mar-a-Lago, and it's been arranged, it turns out, for me to get Botox. And 5 minutes before we're going in, this is like in the phase where we weren't really telling me all that much. They say, you're going to do Botox, because everybody else will be Botox there, and you should have it as well. And the really embarrassing thing is I don't actually know what Botox is.
You don't need
cream?
it.
I honestly, I rang Yvette and I rang my agent and said, they want me to have Botox. But what is it? So they said it's an injection of snake serum. I thought, okay, this is now at this point worrying. But I then spoke to the assistant producer who says, I think it lasts about a week. And so the director and the series producer are in talking to the doctor. And I'm sort of thinking, I've talked to the agent and Yvette both say, trust your instincts if it feels too far. And I decide, I'm into this. It's only going to last a week. I mean, what is it anyway? And so I go in thinking I'm going to do it. I'm then on a couch being filmed. We've been in about half an hour doing other stuff, massage and different things they were doing, and to me physically. And then this really sweaty surgeon arrives who says that you can't have it here. I only do these things in my operating theatre. And I say, do you think I need it? He says, I don't think you really need it. And I say, they told me it lasts about a week. He said, it doesn't really have an impact for like 48 hours. But he said, but after 6 months, you won't any longer see the effect. But for 3 to 6 months, you could expect to see a puffiness around your eyes. And at that point, I just decided that was crossing the line. That was too far. And I just said, on the film, I said, I'm really sorry. I thought about it hard. I don't want to have Botox. And the surgeon says, I think that's a very good decision. He leaves, and the director and the producer are there kind of going, what are you doing? And it was actually quite a tense moment because, they said, Clare at the BBC loves a Botox
come
moment.
on!
They say, we told the BBC there would be Botox. You told us half an hour ago there would be Botox. I said, you didn't tell me it was 6 months. A week, 6 months. And I said, I'm really sorry. I don't care. That is too far. And they said, okay. And things were like tense for about 4 hours.
Yeah.
And then we got over it.
And then you had a spray tan.
But I think in the end, well, no, I actually had this, in the spray tan. They took me straight into the spray tan. I said, I'm only going to do top half, because on Strictly, I only ever did top half. I never had a Jeremy Vine, which is full naked. I only did top half. And then the director says, you don't do the Botox, and now you won't go down to your boxer shorts. And I said, sod it. So I stripped off entirely as my recompense for not doing Botox. I think, though,
the commissioner was very happy about that.
I have never met anybody since who says that I should have done the Botox. So in the end, I think that tells you that we all concluded, that the point where I say no, that is actually a step too far. And the Botox, I didn't really want to be injected and puffy for 6 months.
Fair enough.
For a film.
Fair enough.
Like Trump.
Emily, any hard nose for Ramesh? Botox, did that ever come up?
He has had a particularly disgusting enema in one thing we did, but he always says he'll never get naked, and he always does. Sometimes he refuses to do things and then says, but will it be funny? And we say yes, and we've got no idea, and he always does it. But there is an ethical line that he won't cross, because he's a vegan and he's got very strong feelings about animal welfare. But often the people that we go and visit will be hunters and meat-based diets, and he's always mindful of being respectful towards them, but trying to navigate whatever they're doing in his way. So in the new series, we went to Mongolia and we went up to see the eagle hunters, and he's got a hack for eagle hunting involving a remote-controlled car and a toy fox. Which worked, but only once he put a sheep's lung on top of it. Obviously, he didn't touch. But it's a challenge every time, because we know we'll come up against it, and it's working out on the ground at that moment, well, how do we navigate this? Because we can't, he's very mindful of, I can't be rude about how these people live, but I can't do what they're doing, so what else do I do?
So it's creative thinking that you need to employ. And Wendie, how do you push someone like David Beckham to do something on camera?
You can't.
Okay.
Basically. I think when they're that big, and we had a situation we were filming in the Amazon. We did David Beckham into the unknown, and he wants to ride motorbikes around the Amazon, and we just explained like this was like riding motorbikes around Venice. It's not something you really do. You go to the Amazon, you go on a boat, but he really wants to ride motorbikes. So
Beckham. Beckham doesn't do boats.
Exactly. So we were on the boat for I think a day and a half when he didn't tell me, but one of his friends said no, he wants to get off the boat and ride motorbikes. And so the sort of month recce that I'd done, and the itinerary I'd planned, just went straight out the window, because if you haven't got him on board, you haven't got a film. So we just had to, and we filmed it all, and it's all in the film. And so they tell us, and then there's the thing of trying to get the bikes off the boat and onto another boat, and then of course he breaks down then in the middle of nowhere, because of course he's going to break down because it's not really a place to ride motorbikes. And and then we just ask him, where are you? And he just sort of says, I don't know where I am, but it doesn't matter because I've got nowhere to go. And then actually it's all going a bit wrong for us in terms of sort of the itinerary, but it's going right in terms of we got some good content out of it. Here's a man who was perfectly happy to be broken down in the middle of nowhere because for the first time ever he's got nowhere to go. Yeah. So you sort of have to roll with the punches with people like that.
I learned another TV word, which took me months to work out what they meant, was strawberry filter. But with David Beckham, could you ever do a strawberry filter?
No, we didn't have time, no. We filmed everything and pretty much used everything. We had,
like every
10 days
sandwich eaten.
him just eating something, him washing himself at night was filmed and in the programme. Yeah. When he was on motorbikes for a lot of it, so, you know,
You did your
when he
your
gets
bits.
off to wash himself, you're going to film it. That's going to be in the film.
Moving on, we've talked a bit already about kind of, you know, red lines and trust and conversations about kind of what's happening in a particular film. I'd like to talk a bit about authorship and kind of who owns the editorial of a story when it's a kind of collaboration between a famous face and the filmmaking crew. I'm going to unpack this with a clip from the new series with Ed, where he's examining populism in Europe. And here he's exploring a kind of really quite odd and disturbing, but very mainstream Dutch tradition, which has become a cause célèbre for the far right who are fighting to preserve it. And then we'll talk a bit about kind of editorial involvement. What kind of, you know, editorial input or kind of pre-planning goes into something like that, where you know you're going into something where you're not going to agree necessarily with the people that are there?
I think, I mean, the reason why this is so interesting is that this is a Dutch tradition which every Dutch child participates in. You know, their dads or mums black their face to give presents on the 5th of December. The polls show the vast majority of Dutch citizens support it, but it's become very controversial because it's been, you know, I think, understandably attacked from the left as being racist, and then it gets defended as a Dutch tradition, which is being undermined by political correctness. But you've got this guy here who's Indonesian, who is the most famous Black Pete in the Netherlands, and the reason why he's a Black Pete is because his dad and granddad were both Black Petes, because when they came from Jakarta, from Indonesia, in the middle of the Sukarno Revolution, and were settled in the Netherlands because they were because they'd fought for the Dutch side. They wanted to integrate. They wanted to become part of Dutch culture, and that meant these Indonesian men started blacking up their faces. So it's like it's a very Dutch thing. Mm-hmm. It's got deep in Dutch culture, but you can kind of see why it's really controversial, and the way in which the right is now using it to wind up issues about identity and patriotism. I think the reality, from my point of view, is the way we settled in the series, and we didn't know at the beginning of the Trumpland this was how it's going to be, is that I'm speaking on the way in, I'm doing the voiceover, and I do the conclusion. None of it's scripted. So it ends up being very much owned by me authorially, which means that I never have to say anything I don't want, but I'm also totally encouraged to react exactly how I feel I should react in any situation. If I had said in there that this is wrong, and I'm going to walk out, I don't think anybody in the film would have said that was the wrong thing to do, but actually, because Harold, the Indonesian, is a really nice guy, and because I know already this is very broad-based, my job is to go and try and understand it and find out. So I'm not going in to be judgmental. I'm not going to condemn, certainly from the start. On the other hand, my reactions to it have got to be genuine. So when I sit there thinking, God, this is really quite weird, I mean, I think that is authentic, and that is what allows me to stay in the room. If I'd been told by the film, don't react, then I don't think I could have been in there. But actually, that wouldn't be authentic. And if you're allowed to own the words and you're allowed to react instinctively, then in a way, the risk comes to me. I'm very conscious of the fact in certain settings, including this one, that if I didn't react in a way which felt proper, authentic, but also right, then I would be criticised for that. But at the same time, I feel as though people are willing to come on this journey, and therefore, if I'm being curious and think it's weird but want to understand it, they will come as well. And people will feel conflicted by watching that, but they should. And I did. Pretty much every Dutch citizen these days feels a conflict. But they also think, well, it's what we've always done. So if you say that's racist, it feels racist to me. If you say that's racist, that means that everything I remember about Christmas throughout my whole childhood is racist. And I'm not sure I want to be told that as a Dutch citizen. So that's where the interest comes from in the TV.
And Wendie, I mean, David Herold's story is so intensely personal. You know, does that mean that you kind of there's a big negotiation about kind of editorial control and authorship? I mean, it's kind of his story. Were there ever times when you wanted to have things in it that he didn't, or vice versa?
Not at the edit point. I think during filming there was lots of why are we doing this? Why are we talking about that? Why, you know? And so I had to explain that it wasn't. Sometimes it was about why we visiting different people, you know, or he felt like he'd explored enough of his own episode and wanted to kind of make it about other people. It was there were various reasons why he didn't understand it at times. And each time you would just have to kind of keep going, well, you know, just explain your point as much as possible. There were times when he would, I did say to him at the beginning, there'll be times when you don't know something and it's a conscious unknown. So just be aware of that. You know, you talked earlier about this thing of not knowing. And I think if you're upfront about that, though, it can help. Or did you find that or not?
I didn't find that. But then
right.
I think if you're an actor and you are used to performing in a character into a script, maybe there's some familiarity to discovery. But if you're a politician that felt, as I was, that feels really, really exposing. So I totally understand why sometimes it can help for some people. But for me, it was the opposite. It made me kind of tense. Whereas actually, if I knew enough to understand, then I could relax into it.
But then the problem with you knowing is that you then have to sort of, it's not a surprise, you're not getting a real reaction. And I think that's always our argument, isn't it? That you can't know everything, because if you know everything, and also it's a lot of responsibility for you to not, like if you know something about something and we want you to find out and have a reaction to it, there is a tendency for you might then let slip that you know that. And it's a lot of responsibility on your shoulder.
But I think what we learned was that you're asking the person like me to be very flexible and trusting and do things they've never done before. But on the other hand, the documentary makers also have to be flexible and trusting and see what works. And if you go in with a hard view that the way we make documentaries is you discover things in real time and you know nothing in advance, that may work for some people in some settings. What we learned was that for me, it had absolutely the opposite effect. And so once we'd got over that, and it took an episode for everybody to relax about the fact that, you know, there could be things which I might discover within the scene, but I had to understand the motivation, purpose, where we were getting to. You know, if I go into a room where there's 100 pictures, this happened in Trumpland, they wanted me to get to the picture of the host with Bill and Hillary. And there's 100 pictures in there, but there's one of them with Bill and Hillary. And if they say to me, there's an interesting photo in there, it's incredibly stressful. They're trying to work out, there's 100 things. Which one do they mean? Is that the one? Could they mean that? And you're sort of searching like mad. Whereas actually what they'd say is there's 100 pictures in there. Search, there's a Bill and Hillary one. You say, okay. And you go in and you search, and then suddenly when you see it, you still see it for the first time. Your reaction is authentic, it's real, but it takes away all the stress of what the hell is going on, why do they want me to do this,
So trying to second guess them. Takes away the second guessing.
Takes away the second guessing in my, and also, because I'm a politician, there's a degree of risk aversion. So if you say to me, it's going to be a photo or a thing which could be on one side of the line or the other, find out in real time, I'm definitely cautious. Because if you said to me, when it happens, it's going to be great, but it's just so you know, it's in this realm, it would be like this, then I can think, oh, that's okay, because I understand that, and that will make sense. So I can commit to it. So
I think everyone's different, and I think if you're...
Exactly right.
Yeah. Because
therefore, what happened in my show was that there was an element of, this is how we do things in documentaries.
Right.
And I said, well, that may be, but if that's how you do it, it's not going to work for me.
Right.
We need to have a conversation about how we can do it differently. And once we're over that hurdle, it's worked really, really well for 5 episodes. But for the first one, it was just a bit of a challenge because it just, it may have worked for somebody who'd spent 25 years being a presenter in documentaries, but if you came like I did with the career I'd had at my stage, it wasn't going to work. And once the flexibility was on both sides, then we found a way to make it work.
I think as you're saying, Wendie, it's about horses for courses, isn't it? And I guess that's part of your art as programme makers, is to try and kind of find the technique that works for whoever it is that you're working with. Anyway, we could chat on and on, but we must open the floor to some questions. I can't see whether the lights need to come up. And we need a microphone to go to whoever's going to speak. Thanks.
Hi. I was just curious on your point, Ed, as to whether you started to actually initiate ideas and put in ideas and want to bring maybe your political or historical knowledge and that sort of context that you might have. Did the first episode you weren't contributing so much, it sounds like, and then once you were let in more to the sort of producing process, then did that become like a bigger voice and a bigger influence, and you, do you see what I mean? Were you initiating?
I think we've talked quite a lot with me saying what documentary makers should do, but I think there's also a big learning from my point of view. I think if you come into a world which you've never been part of, which you don't understand, and when you're dealing with people who have been doing this for 10, 20, 30 years and really know what you're doing, so long as everybody's decided we're all in this together, and that means all the way through the edit to the end, I think the best thing for me to do is basically say, to trust and say, you know what you're doing. And therefore, I've never sought to second guess the experts. And more than that, I think actually for both series, I was quite happy to sit back and let them do the development, because in the end, they have an understanding about what will work and why it will work in a documentary, which I don't have. I think the thing which has changed is that within once we've got the plan, then I'm more part of the editorial conversation when we're on the shoot. We're talking about things a lot, and partly because once it's become clear, which we didn't know at the start, that the conclusion words will be unscripted, me just extemporizing, the more we've been talking about what we're trying to achieve together, the more likely it is that I will end up in a place which is going to work for the film and the story and the arc and the edit. So I think we've definitely worked out that a conversation is good, and so in that sense I'm much more involved in the editorial arc than I was at the start. But I think if you're me, there's certain points where you can say, I can't do that, or you need to do it in a way which helps me. The counterpart to that is you have to have humility. And the humility is, these guys have done this for years, and they know what they're doing, and I don't. And actually, the best thing for me to do is learn.
You do know about politics maybe more than a producer might. You are going to bring things that are very specific to you and your experience. I suppose to me, that's an attraction of what you would bring to it. So
and I think that happens in the episode. And sometimes I will get very passionate or personal about a particular thing. The use of the word elite, I hate the use of the word elite, out of context. And that is something which I think the team this time around are quite taken back by. So it's not like I don't hold back. But, one thing I think I also learned is that I shouldn't ever do anything where it doesn't make sense that it should be me doing it. If I do something which is about any old thing, it works because we're talking about what's happening to people and politicians and politics, and I've come from that. So of course there is an angle into that. But if I start telling people, if I pretend I know more about development than them or how to produce a scene, the thing I'm really good at knowing now is when a scene's not being produced. But that isn't the same as me producing it.
Great. Have we got any other questions? Can you get a microphone over here? And I think this is probably the last one, isn't it? Because we're going to run out of time, unfortunately.
As a panel, have you got any tips for going cold to people that you've not worked with before to get them into a new space? Because all the ones I've ever done, it tends to be a relationship we've previously had and we ask people to do something, or the other way, we go via a mate of theirs. What are your top tips for persuading someone?
I think I've got one example of this which worked really well. It's just get the best idea ever and make it impossible to say no. When Mario Balotelli was in the UK, he wouldn't be interviewed by anybody. So I committed myself to try and get an interview with him. And I went to Manchester City, the team that he was being looked after, and said, right, what would it take? He goes, you've got to do something that nobody else is offering, because they've offered everything. So over the course of about 6 months, we persuaded Noel Gallagher because he was a big Oasis fan, Balotelli. So we persuaded Noel Gallagher to drop a night of his world tour and to get into Manchester on one specific day and be interviewed. So they almost interviewed each other. And that's the only interview in his entire time in the UK that Balotelli said yes to. because it was Noel Gallagher from Oasis, and he was willing to cancel a night of his world tour to come and interview him. In the end of it, we put out the longest edit we've ever had on any football piece across the BBC. It was an 18-minute or 16.5-minute interview with Balotelli being interviewed by Noel Gallagher, and they actually ended up interviewing each other. So Balotelli said no to about 622 interview requests up until that point that he said yes to Noel Gallagher, because from his point of view and from the club's point of view, this is such a good idea, we can't say no to it. So I think that probably helps, that sort of thing.
Emily, any tips?
I would say, and this is so obvious, I'm sure you did this already, but it's just displaying your complete understanding of who they are when you make that initial approach. So in the email, it just shows that you understand who they are and what they really care about, and it doesn't feel like it's an email that's gone to everybody else or an idea that anyone else could do. In the same way that Ed's saying, it just bringing some people into this space won't always work, and often it's really hard because you want the idea to be bespoke to them, and in order to do that you have to have a conversation with them and have FaceTime and develop and then shoot a taster and then see whether it works or it doesn't work. So I think in that first instance it's just doing that really deep scour of their background so you can pull out one little detail which will make the difference and make them go, oh, this is interesting, this feels a bit different to all the other emails that we've had today.
Fantastic, and I think we're going to have to end it there. So, second series of Ed and Ramesh later this year. Lots of great things from you guys as well, I'm sure, coming down the tracks. Ed, Emily, Wendie, Dan, thank you all for coming. Hope you enjoyed it.